Giano, welcome back to the program. It's been too long since we've talked.
It's been way too long, and I'm so happy to come talk to you about this book, which, interestingly enough, has been endorsed by President Trump and Coulter, Ben Shapiro, Newt Gingrich, Kiko James, the president of Heritage, and Clarence Cox III, who's the former president of a law enforcement group. And I'm sure your name is going on that list very soon here, Tom.
Okay, so how do you think that conservatism can win back the Americans that liberalism failed, the subtitle of your book, when the head of your party is extorting a foreign government to try to get to try to help himself get reelected in 2020? How do you pull that off?
So first and foremost, let me tell my story, and I talk about this in my book, Taken for Granted. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, extremely poor, lights, gas, and water off at the same time. Mom addicted to crack cocaine. I got involved in politics when I was 14 years old, and that happened because I was going down a street with my grandfather driving through an area of Chicago called Inglewood one day, and I saw a lady who looked drugged up and beat down, and I knew it was my mother. I began to tear up. My grandfather, in his very southern voice, says, "What's wrong with you, boy?" And I say, "This lady." And then I realized it wasn't my mother, but it could have been. I said, "What can I do to prevent this from happening?" And he begins to tell me about the power elected officials have to increase the penalty of lawful of those who sell and distribute drugs, and how they can provide grant funding for those who want to be rehabilitated. Then I got involved in politics at the age of 14. And I saw how year after year Democrats would come into this community that I lived and all over the city of Chicago and make these promises, but nothing would ever change. Meanwhile, you got black unemployment the highest it had ever been. You got crime running rampant through the streets. Drug dealing. You got all these policies, the government-backed policies, which are meant to keep people trapped in where they are.
Well, hang on just a second, Giano. The LBJ's Great Society programs cut over the following 10 years, before they were largely repealed by Reagan, cut poverty in half in the United States. And I believe that they cut black poverty by more than in half. But I know for a fact that it was in the neighborhood of the high 40% of people were literally no longer in poverty as a result of those programs, because of housing programs, because of food stamps, because of support to education, because of tax credit programs. I mean, there's just a whole plethora of programs. I get it that they're both Republican and Democratic politicians have to a large extent failed our cities over the years, but I don't see how this is conservative or liberal. Let's
be very clear. I support a strong safety net. I just support it from a temporary standpoint. In the neighborhoods I lived in, it was generational. This wasn't you're on the program for a couple years.
But don't you think that's because Wells Fargo was redlining every opportunity? Don't you think that was because the big employers in Chicago were not hiring black people? In fact, you could even argue back up until the 60s that even unions were keeping black people out. And, there's a conservative talking point for you if you want. But I mean, that's racism. That's not politics.
Unions have disenfranchised African Americans 100%, but we're talking about policies that were pushed by liberal politicians, which causes people to capitulate to poverty. We're talking about you talk about.
So how does cutting somebody off of their Medicaid, their access to health care, you think that's going to cause them to suddenly say, gee, I think I should, go out there and get a job, when there's no job for them to get?
When Newt Gingrich put forth the 96 welfare reform, I thought that was great. You get people, you let them stay on welfare for a little bit, allow them to get a job or go to school, and then at some particular point you take them off, but you get them comfortable.
Yeah, it was a 5-year limit, but where that has failed, and we're seeing this we're seeing this with we've got higher maternal and infant mortality rates in our inner cities in the United States and in southern rural areas, in red state rural areas. We've got higher infant mortality rates than most third world countries.
What we also have? We have the highest employment that we've ever seen in our country, just about, especially for African Americans, the lowest unemployment rate in our country's history, at least where it was recorded. We got the black Americans are doing extraordinarily well.
I agree. President Obama's policies have done really well. And now we're in the 6th year of the 10th year.
The Bureau of Labor and Statistics did a study from 2016, the last year of President Obama's term in office up until now, there's been over 1.3 million jobs added for Black Americans. You think about criminal justice reform, thousands of people released from jail, 90% of them are Black. You think about opportunity zones, almost 9,000 of them in Black marginalized zip codes where companies can come in and invest. You think about greater funding for HBCUs.
You're talking about all things that Bill Clinton supported and Barack Obama supported, Giano. But you haven't answered my question. How can conservatives
supported low unemployment for Black people? They just never did anything to cause it to happen. Sure.
Okay. How can conservatives win when the head of their party, and we've only got we've got a few minutes here left, I guess, to talk. But how can conservatives win when the head of their party is a corrupt hustler who refuses to show his taxes, who cheated on both of his last two wives, who paid cover-up hush money to a porn star and a Playboy model, before an election, who's committed these crimes? How can you possibly win with this guy at the head of the ticket?
You know what's interesting? I'm not familiar with there being a such thing as a perfect person. Certainly he has his flaws, his moral failings. That's 100% accurate. However, I'm talking about from a policy perspective.
I'm talking criminal failings.
Well, first and foremost, if that was something that was to be proven, then he would be in handcuffs right now. That's not something to be proven.
Well, no, according to the Department of Justice, he can't be arrested. He has to be impeached, which is actually what's going on right now.
Right. And you read the transcript, didn't you?
I did, where he nakedly told Lucenska, what's his name?
Where's the evidence? Where was it? They said it was a quid pro quo.
Zelensky.
Did you see that? I didn't.
Yeah, Zelensky said, "Hey, we're ready to buy some missiles," and Trump said, "But I want a favor, though."
No, but they got their funding. He never made a statement.
They got their funding 2 days after the whistleblower's story got leaked to the New York Times.
But they still got their funding.
They got their funding because Trump couldn't run his con anymore.
Let's keep in mind, President Obama held up funding for 8 years. He sent them blankets and food.
This is not about Obama, and Obama wasn't trying to do anything with Ukraine in order to get himself reelected. Obama wasn't corruptly committing extortion. You may disagree with Obama's foreign policy with regard to Ukraine.
Let me ask you this: Do you think Joe Biden's son was corrupted?
I don't think that.
Going to sit on a board with no experience.
I think it's a terrible thing.
All this money.
I don't think he should have done it. I think it's a terrible thing. But that's not what this
should have pushed it either, right? Saying I'm gonna fire the prosecutor.
Good job at trying to change the subject, but the bottom line here, Giano, is that we've got a president who's committing extortion right out in front of God and the whole world.
If it was extortion, it would hold up in a court of law, and he would be in handcuffs.
He would not be in handcuffs. The Department of Justice has said he can't be arrested.
Impeachment is a political process, and if anybody saw that hearing yesterday, because I sat for mostly 5 hours of that, I didn't hear anybody with direct evidence or who actually heard this president say, I want you to do something
and
for
you know
me
why that is?
For political. Why is that?
Because unlike Bill Clinton, unlike Richard Nixon, and unlike Andrew Johnson, this president has refused to answer lawfully issued federal subpoenas. He is engaged in a massive cover-up of his own criminal doings.
About for his tax returns?
No, I'm talking about subpoenas for example, for John Bolton to come in and testify. There's
this thing called executive privilege. President Obama.
This is not about executive privilege. Executive privilege does not cover crimes. The Supreme Court ruled that in '74.
This isn't a crime. You're talking about John Bolton testifying. I'm saying that executive privilege.
You can no, seriously. As a matter of fact and law, you can't assert executive privilege in an impeachment hearing. You can't. Richard Nixon tried, and the Supreme Court said, "Sorry, that doesn't work."
So I'm gonna tell you again, because we've talked about this all on there, and for people that know, I work for Fox News Channel. This president, and if you saw the hearing, if people sat in and they listened to what they had to say, there was no one with any direct evidence of President Trump's wrongdoing. It was
because Trump is hiding
it. This person told me, this person, this person, this person. We don't know, and I'm all for if the president did something wrong, and if he's corrupted, yes, he should be brought to justice. We got to hold our party accountable. I talk about that in my book.